To understand any disease, but especially one that is novel, one that scientists have never seen before, it is critical to go back to its origin and answer the most basic of questions. Where was it first discovered, and how?
The official word from the Chinese CDC was not transmissible human to human. I had multiple discussions with my counterpart in China, George Gao, that I wanted to have our CDC office in Beijing, deployed to help them. They're right there, and I wanted to augment that by 20 or 30 people and get into Wuhan and try to answer a few questions. Is this human-to-human transmissible, yes or no? Is this transmissible only in symptomatic, or is it asymptomatic and transmissible? And I told them I was concerned that it was human-to-human transmissible. And I said to George, George, you don't really believe that mother and father and daughter all got the event from an animal at the same time, do you? So he said, Bob, there's just no evidence of human-to-human transmission.
But that was the evidence of human-to-human transmission.
It was. I would say it was probably by the 5th of January, 4th or 5th of January, I'd really told him he had to go out in the community and look for people that have unspecified pulmonary illness that didn't go to the sea market. And he did that. And that evening, he told me they obviously found a lot of cases. And that evening, he was quite distraught because he came to the conclusion that the cat was out of the bag.
When he called you and was so upset, crying, distraught on the phone, that was a warning, wasn't it? He was now officially worried.
As you remember, the early mortality in China was somewhere between 5 and 10%. I'd probably be crying too.
Wuhan is a city that is massive, 11 million people. It is essentially shut down. It is locked down. They are not letting anyone out via airport, via train station.
How much did you trust the information coming out of China initially?
I always had skepticism about it because of what we went through with SARS. People forget, but in SARS, China was saying, oh, it's flu. And then the next thing you know, that SARS was all over the world, in Canada and Australia, all over the place. So they are not very transparent in the past. It wasn't outright lying. They just didn't give you all the information.
How big a difference would it have been if our own investigators had been on the ground in China?
I think it would have been a significant difference.
I think we could have learned very quickly that we're dealing with a different beast than the one that everyone had sold us. They sold us, this is like SARS, this is like flu. Well, SARS and flu, you can go after symptomatic case finding because they cause symptomatic disease. And unfortunately, this virus, probably a majority of its transmission is in the non-symptomatic stage. The Chinese have reported evidence of transmission in the asymptomatic phase based on data that they have reviewed. CDC has not been given the opportunity to review that data.
Suspicion of the data coming out of China had grown so deep that after Chinese scientists released a study on January 24th confirming the worst-case scenario had arrived, their first confirmed asymptomatic infection, Redfield, Fauci, and others in the United States still needed to see the data in order to believe it.
As Bob said, and I agree, we would really like to see the data.
Did you believe it to be true at that time? I mean, you were hearing this from China, but on January 28th, you said, in the history of
respiratory-borne viruses of any type, asymptomatic transmission has never been the driver of outbreaks. Well, exactly. I said that, and it's true. I mean, I find it interesting. People throw quotes back at you, 9-10 months ago, and they say, but you said in the history of respiratory disease. That is an absolutely correct statement. But this was different. And that's the point. And we were struggling. How different is this?
Turns out this novel virus really was different, at least compared to the more recent outbreaks of SARS and MERS, which saw no significant asymptomatic spread. With COVID-19, more than half of those infected contracted the virus from someone without any symptoms at all, making it that much harder to diagnose and contain. The question is, why did it take until late March, though, for the United States to finally figure that out.
I think if we had sent our people into Wuhan and able to talk to the Chinese scientists in a conversation that might have lasted an hour, you could have gotten so much information. Right from the get-go, they would have told us, don't believe what you're reading. This is spread asymptomatically, it spreads highly efficiently, and it's killing people.
Do you know why now, in retrospect, you didn't get in?
Well, I think the China CDC, my friend George Gao, I don't think he was in the know either.
What do you mean?
George really wanted to bring in all the power of CDC to work with his CDC to get this done. But he wasn't able. This got clearly managed at a much higher political level for some reason within China. And I know the president called the president of China to get us in. And, I know Secretary Azar called the secretary, their Minister of Health, to get us in. But the bottom line is we didn't get in.
And a year later, do you have any idea what that reason is?
I mean, who do you believe, Sanjay, that a year after this pathogen started, we're now having a critical analysis of where it came from by scientists? That just seems a little delayed. All right? I mean, it seems to me that some of the information is people are not being transparent about it. I could use the word cover up, but I don't know that, so I'm not going to speculate that.
Developing this morning, investigators from the World Health Organization have discovered signs that the initial coronavirus outbreak in Wuhan in China was larger than previously thought.
More questions, fewer answers over the access and data China gave to the WHO.
It is becoming increasingly clear that this virus was spreading much earlier than we were alerted.
As soon as George understood it, we understood it. But what I'm telling you is, I think Wuhan understood it back in the fall.
China has vehemently denied any cover-up, insisting that it responded to the outbreak in a transparent and responsible manner. And in a statement out of its Washington embassy, has said that the United States is now pointing fingers at other countries. Now, while it is almost impossible to know exactly what would have been different, or how many lives we could have saved had our experts been allowed inside Wuhan earlier, what we do know is that it cost us precious time.
We said, I guess what we need to do is shut down air travel from China. Because we don't know who's infected and who isn't.
Testing up to... When I spoke with Dr. Redfield back in February of 2020, the United States was just beginning to acknowledge that community spread of the virus was inevitable. China, by comparison, had been well underway preparing for this once-in-a-century pandemic by constructing brand new hospitals at extraordinary speed and also amassing emergency supplies, according to Dr. Robert Cadlick, who served as the ASPR, the HHS Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response.
They recognized that something was going on in early December. So they had about a 30-day head start to when they publicly announced on 31 December that they had this mysterious pneumonia. And so they were already buying things on the market well in advance of what we were. So they make a lot of that material, but even things that were made here in the United States, we found that the domestic supplies were drying up because of foreign purchases.
Was China being purposely opaque, buying up stuff, not alerting the rest of the world what was going on? What's your impression?
I don't want to be an apologist for them, because I think they were less than transparent in January, honestly. But I think part of this was a war that kind of exploded in Wuhan for reasons that are still yet clear to me, and basically overwhelmed them. By their own words, what happened in Wuhan was transmitted to every province in China within 30 days.
If I was to guess, this virus started transmitting somewhere in September, October in Wuhan.
September, October.
That's my own view. It's an only opinion. I'm allowed to have opinions now. I am of the point of view that I still think the most likely etiology of this pathogen in Wuhan was from a laboratory, escaped. The other people don't believe that. That's fine. Science will eventually figure it out. It's not unusual for respiratory pathogens that are being worked on in a laboratory to infect a laboratory worker.
It is also not unusual for that type of research to be occurring in Wuhan. The city is a widely known center for viral studies in China, including the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which has experimented extensively with bat coronaviruses.
It is a remarkable conversation I feel like we're having here, because you are the former CDC director and you were the director at the time this was all happening.
For the first time, the former CDC director is stating publicly that he believes this pandemic started months earlier than we knew, and that it originated not at a wet market, but inside a lab in China.
These are two significant things to say, Dr. Redfield.
And that's not implying any intentionality. You know, it's my opinion, right? But I am a virologist. I have spent my life in virology. I do not believe this somehow came from a bat to a human, and at that moment in time, the virus that came to the human became one of the most infectious viruses that we know in humanity for human-to-human transmission. Normally when a pathogen goes from a zoonotic to human, it takes a while for it to figure out how to become more and more efficient in human-to-human transmission. I just don't think this makes biological sense.
So in the lab, do you think that that process of becoming more efficient was happening? Is that what you were suggesting?
Yeah, let's just say I have coronavirus that I'm working on. Most of us in the lab, we're trying to grow a virus. We try to help make it grow better and better and better and better and better and better so we can do experiments and figure out about it. That's the way I put it together.
Chinese officials and state media have been increasingly promoting an unsubstantiated so-called multiple origin theory, suggesting the pandemic may have started in various locations around the world, even a US military lab. And the World Health Organization, it has called any lab accident theory extremely unlikely. But a team of their scientists, allowed inside Wuhan more than a year after the outbreak, has so far been unable to determine the definitive origin of the virus. And perhaps at this point, many wonder if they ever will.
So lessons learned looking forward. We need a WHO. The world needs an organization that coordinates the global health issues, but they need to reform in a way where they could go in and tell the member state China that you absolutely need to give us this information. And they didn't. Chinese said, no, we're not going to give it to you, and that was it, with no consequences. And that was not right, and that's got to change.
Next,
Did we really believe that a contagious virus that was spreading around the world wasn't going to come here?
So now you know why I came to the White House.